So thank you all so much for your patience. We greatly appreciate it. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Stoltz. I will put my email away as I was wondering if people were trying to connect with us that way, and share my screen. Dr. Stoltz, all you.
Okay, awesome. Good afternoon. Glad to see some of you. I think most everybody is here, but we're going to just dive right into the roll call. Kati, let's begin.
Hi, yes, thank you. Dr. Matthew Conway,
Present.
Dr. Michael Coyne,
Hi, everyone.
Dr. Margie Gillis,
Here.
Kim Healy,
Present.
Stephen Hernandez, Dr. Melissa Hickey,
Here.
Gary Highsmith.
Here. I am here.
Thank you. Yasmin Ithier Vicente, Dr. Tamu Lucero,
Here.
Dr. Ashley Oldham,
Here.
Chandra Scott Brown,
Present.
Dr. James Evidenchik.
Present.
Thank you. Roll call is complete.
Thank you, Kati, so much. We're going to go right into our accepting or discussing the minutes from our previous meeting, March 18th, sorry, the minutes from March 18th. And so do we have a motion to approve the minutes dated March 18th, 2025? If you could say.
Motion to approve.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Conway. Do we have a second to this motion?
Second.
I'll second it.
Kim.
Oh, I think I heard
Kim,
Kim
whatever.
first.
Yep. Thank you, Ms. Healy. Any discussion on the motion from the council? Hearing none and seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please either use the raise your hand button or raise your hand. Thank you. The motion passes. Kati, have any council members signed up in advance for the comments and insights portion?
Hi, Ellen. No, I did not receive any emails from council members stating that they would like to speak today.
Okay, thank you so much then. The good news is then we can move right to expanding our state literacy strategy. We're going to be focusing on disciplinary learning in grades 4 through 12. We will have an opportunity for council Q&A, and I'm going to hit the tennis ball over to you, Dr. Hickey, to please introduce our guest speaker. Just to clarify, this is courtesy of Ms. Kim Healy, who submitted the form to us on December 17th on 2024, and it was approved by our council to have Dr. Rachel Gabriel come and join us with a focus on disciplinary literacy at our last meeting. So, Dr. Hickey.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint. There we go. So, oops. Dr. Gabriel is a professor of literacy education at the University of Connecticut. She's the author of more than 50 articles and author or editor of 7 books for literacy teachers, leaders, and education researchers. Rachel currently serves as editor-in-chief of The Reading Teacher and director of the UConn Reading and Language Arts Center. A former teacher and reading specialist, Rachel's research is focused on the intersections of literacy instruction, leadership, and intervention with local, state, and federal policy. I do see Chandra's hand is still up. Do you have a question? Okay, then we shall move forward. Dr. Gabriel, just please tell me when you want me to advance and I can do that for you.
If it's okay, I'd love to just share the same from my screen. I can see my notes that way.
Oh, sure. Yes, I can take down.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, do you see what I see? As they say, it looks like it. All right, please let me know if there's anything that glitches for you in your end. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to speak with this group, especially on this topic. It's getting some oxygen again, finally, after a long time. And so this is very exciting, and I'm grateful for the invitation. I thought I would organize this based on sort of 3 broad questions. And I do have sort of professor syndrome, which I think other people on the call may share, where I kind of speak in 90-minute segments without stopping, and I have fewer than 90 minutes. So I'm going to do my best to do like a flyover of a couple of things that definitely deserve a lot more words about them. So bear with me, please. And I'm leaving you with a set of resources that I've been building online so that you have something durable to return to after our brief overview today. So starting with what's different in 412, I have 2 images for you to look at and consider for the next minute or 2. One is a sample of a high school schedule in a high school that has a block schedule. Maybe the first day includes these classes and then hockey practice. Maybe the second day of the week, and then these rotate to include the classes you see under the blue line and then play rehearsal. And I think about the main characteristics of an adolescent reader as being profoundly shaped by 2 things. One of them is the accumulation of literacy experiences, and the second is the proliferation of literacy experiences. They're reading more kinds of text with greater complexity and much more volume. So more text that's harder and many more kinds of text they're reading, and they're writing them across their day. So if you imagine what you might see in band, and then in algebra, in gym, and then even including lunch, in intervention and in a workshop, whatever workshop is in your high school schedule, you might imagine seeing a wide range of different kinds of text. In terms of accumulation, readers are either, we think about reading as a self-extending process. We have this idea that if you read more, you get better. We have this idea that early experiences are tremendously impactful for later experiences. And this really comes down to kind of an illustration of what we call the Matthew effect, where if you practice more, you get more exposure, which means you have more opportunities to practice your skills, and those skills can develop. So you have a chance to be engaged and enjoy what you're doing. And if you're confident, you'll spend time doing it. And if you spend time doing it, you get more practice and more exposure. So you're better at it. So you enjoy it. So you want to do it. So you spend more time doing it. So you get more practice and more exposure. And then you're better at it. So you enjoy it. And if you enjoy it, you'll spend time doing it. And you get this sort of snowball effect, which you can call a cycle of success. But you can imagine really easily that snowball can get kinked at any point. You could have a kink at engagement. You don't like what you're reading. You don't understand why you have to read it. And even though you might have understood, you don't feel good about it. You don't want to spend time doing it. You get less practice, less exposure, and therefore things become more and more difficult. So when I speak with secondary teachers, I'm always talking about how you can interrupt a cycle of failure at any point. You can be the teacher that builds confidence. You can be the teacher that builds decoding ability. You can be the teacher that gives them a nudge in the right direction at any point in this cycle. But as people sort of doing policy planning for K-12, we have to be very aware that the accumulation of negative and positive literacy experiences shapes the reader profoundly and shapes what they will put up with in terms of instruction, what their needs are in terms of instruction, and what counts as optimal instruction. So if there are principles for adolescent literacy, I guess maybe the overarching principle is, yes, it is different. Once we start to compartmentalize learning into the different content areas, which in some districts may start in 4th or 5th or 6th, part of it has to do with organization of schooling, the infrastructure for learning. And then part of it has to do with the development of the brain and maturation processes. So we have both of these that we're thinking about here. And if one of them is more compelling to you, I invite you to lean into that one. I'm going to try and tell this story from a few different angles, but basically the story is this. Yes, adolescent readers and writers need different kinds of instructional supports and opportunities to grow. Mostly this has to do with the infrastructure of school, means that what we are asking of them proliferates. Distractions and things that they are capable of and interested in, and that they get a lot of positive reinforcement from, are also proliferating. So there's even more kind of competition for their attention and their time. And then also they have this internally, they have the reader identity, the reader confidence, and then the self-efficacy as a reader and writer that has accumulated over time. By the time they hit 4th grade, over 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of experience in school. That kind of baggage doesn't exist in pre-K, but it has been accumulating since then. And so when we think about what do you need for complex tasks that are quite varied from each other across the day as they go to these different content area classes, as they engage with increasingly complex and specialized content topics, we need students not to just be able to recognize words and read them fast and smooth enough to understand. We need them to be powerful processors. What separates somebody who does pretty well until 4th grade from somebody who does pretty well after 4th grade is, are they a powerful processor of text? Can they do something with text as a reader or a writer? Not just do they know what's there, but can they use it to do something? Sometimes we think about this as like the read to learn to read to do is really what we're looking for past 4th grade. And we know that powerful processors are fueled by engagement in a way that is unique from maybe their younger counterparts who are identifying and finding their way into text. And that they are propelled forward. They're able to do that specialized processing in ways that show up and matter in the different classes that they are attending, because their strategies can become more specialized for each audience purpose and format of text that they're looking at. So that basically means they need lots of different opportunities for practice. We are thinking not only about increasing reading ability, but reading flexibility, their ability to adapt to different text types and purposes, their awareness of the features of different text types and purposes so that they know kind of where they are and what they're supposed to do with these things, and their ability to participate in the different communities that do different kinds of academic or intellectual social thinking. We have kind of helpful and unhelpful ways of thinking about this. Reading is certainly a place where simple graphics kind of take on a life of their own and often have like an outsized impact. There is a triangle associated with disciplinary literacy that came out in 2008. The Shanahans put this one out, and it was designed to demonstrate one idea, but it has been extrapolated to demonstrate a bunch of others that just aren't really true. So I have it flipped for you. The idea is that like we have basic literacy, and then there's intermediate literacy, which are sort of general literacies, and then disciplinary literacy is specialized. So on their, you know, how many years old is that now? On their almost 20-year-old triangle, it's the tippity top. When we think about what text students need to use in their lives, and if you think about your own, like think about what tabs are open on your phone right now, think about the tabs that are open in your browser at the moment, very few things that we actually use in school or out of school are general. Most of them are specialized. We have our map open. That is not a general text. That is specialized for navigation. We've got text messages open. That formatting and the ways that we interact and use print in that setting is not general. It's specialized for that particular kind of communication. Unless you're my dad, in which case he's still right. Anyway, but you know what I mean. So we have very few basic texts. We have some general texts that you don't need specific strategies or any kind of flexibility or awareness to interact with. And there are many, many specialized texts that students and adults are grappling with in order to participate in the work that they want to do in the world, in school and out of school. The good news is that that these specialized tests are upheld by motivation. They're upheld by background knowledge. And that means that we get what people sometimes call the Harry Potter effect, where kids know so much about a text and they want to engage with it so much that they're able to read it, even though it seems like it would be sort of pretty high above. If we looked at like the Lexile level of Harry Potter, we would really wonder about why 2nd and 3rd graders were reading it 10 and 15 years ago. And that's when we named the effect. But students are able to engage with specialized text because complex is interesting and interesting is easy. This is a sort of a play on the Navy SEALs quote about slow is smooth and smooth is fast. It may seem a little bit counterintuitive. However, what they gain, if we think about that cycle of success, supporting self-efficacy, confidence, and supporting engagement adds fuel for them to be able to apply and get the practice so that they get the exposure, so that they develop the skill to participate or interact with these increasingly specialized, interesting skills. I'm going to do a little theory wonking for a little minute because it's one of my favorite things to do. So just bear with me. If this is your jam, then welcome. It's really super to have you here. If you would rather roll your eyes, then this is maybe a great time for you to check your messages and get a Coke. It's only 3 slides and then we're going to keep going. But I mentioned I want to wrap this idea a couple of different ways so that people have different ways to grab onto it. So, like Simple View of Reading is really about what readers know. And we have more recently kind of expanded this to the active view of reading, which gives us this picture of how that knowledge is used. So we use word recognition and we use language comprehension by engaging these bridging processes. And we can't do bridging processes without active self-regulation. I think one of the big gifts of this model and what it's added to the conversation over the last 5 years is it shows like exactly where executive function comes into the equation, exactly where motivation and engagement comes into the equation. It fuels the bridge. It allows those bridging processes to engage those sets of knowledge so that reading can happen. And so if we think about what skilled readers, what specialized readers, what increasingly mature readers and writers need to be able to do, they need to, it begins with motivation and engagement so that they can marshal their executive function skills and their strategy use in order to keep their reading processes going when the text gets hard, when the text gets long, when it's unfamiliar, and when the content or the messages within the text are complex, they're difficult, they're new. So we can think about this as a jumping off point for saying, this process that we know as an expansion of the Simple View begins with active self-regulation, which means our instruction also has to begin with what are our reasons and our resources for the self-regulation we need to engage the print. This is an expansion of the expansion. This is the asset-based integrative view. This is newer yet. And this is really thinking about how those processes are accomplished in the world. So Simple View of Reading is theoretically what kind of happens in space, like between different concepts. And the active view is thought of or is described as an in the head view, like between your ears, what's going on. This kind of puts the cognitive inside of the social and attempts to account for how sometimes our cognitive processes are supported by our cultural and linguistic resources, and they're supported by the environment that we're in, and they're supported by the pedagogies that we're exposed to, but sometimes they're also thwarted by the kind of pedagogy we're exposed to, by the environment that we're learning in, and by the mismatch between the cultural and linguistic resources we bring and what we see in school settings. So you'll recognize a lot of the same things in these circles with some differences in terminology that are just more inclusive of different kinds of learners. And the expansion here really builds off of this autonomous self-regulation thing to show that what makes the difference for people is really about the competence, the relatedness, the autonomy. And when you think about if you pick up a social psychology textbook on adolescence, it is all about competence, relatedness, and autonomy. It's a phase of our development where we are developing and distinguishing in these areas. It's a phase of our development where the social takes on an outsized role in our consciousness and in our reward networks. And so when we think about what should be different, because it should be different, what should be different when we think about instruction, intervention, and assessment for 412, it starts and ends with a greater investment in engagement, a greater investment in the variety of confidence building experiences, and a greater investment in the value of the activity, in the engagement value of what kids are being asked to read and write. Disciplinary literacy is a part of the conversation. It's not the entire conversation, but it is a part of the conversation about how we accomplish the kind of instruction that adolescents need in order to be engaged learners. And engaged learners are way better than advanced learners. Engaged learners persist in the face of difficulty. They can initiate and sustain tasks, and they are able to transfer and extend what they're learning independently. We want engaged learners. Disciplinary literacy is a piece of that. It's really more than anything else that we could use to define it. It's an orientation to the work of teaching that is focused on action. So we are focusing on students using text to do things, using text to apply knowledge, using text to create change in their environment, in their social world, in their minds, using text to do. There's always an active verb in there. And this is where we get the sort of learning to read, reading to learn, learning to do. That's the top of our triangle, where learning to read, basic, reading to learn, general. Here we are at learning to do. And so doing disciplinary literacy is actually associated with, empirically, a lot of really incredibly positive outcomes, which is why people get super excited about it when they first hear about it. That's why I have Joey in the corner being like, oh my goodness, whoa, because we can associate the idea of disciplinary literacy with increased engagement in thinking and doing. We can associate disciplinary literacy instruction with changes in content learning and achievement, as well as literacy learning and achievement. They co-develop simultaneously. We can associate it with changes in engagement and confidence, and even school engagement, and even engagement in particular content areas. The extent to which disciplinary teaching engages disciplinary literacy is also the extent to which it's inclusive of different identities, of different ways of thinking, and students who didn't necessarily have background or interest in a particular topic. So if you think about how it's pretty common for folks to say, oh, I'm not that great at math, and we have social and cultural resources that say it's okay to say that. It's not okay to say that about reading in our culture at the moment, or in our society at the moment. But we do certainly see in middle and high school students gravitating towards one discipline or another, or a set of disciplines or another, and really seeing themselves as successful there, but not necessarily in other places. And then we see those trends play out as big discrepancies in the identities that are represented in engineering versus the humanities, or in medicine versus anywhere else. And so some of this is directly related to the ways that people are invited to participate in disciplinary learning, and whether they are developing literacy for that discipline, or whether the discipline is being taught to them, but not practiced with them. So this can be a really exciting thing, because this is a framework that helps us think about much more empowering, much more liberating pedagogies across K-12, really. There's some emerging work that really shows a lot of liberatory qualities of disciplinary literacy orientations in pre-K4. But most of our research on disciplinary literacy came from college down. Thinking about content area reading and reading English for specific purposes and genre theory, and bringing it down from post-secondary into high school and down into middle school as well. So one thing that may happen, and I'd love for you to keep your eye out for it, is as people get excited about disciplinary literacy, and we start to give it names, and we start to trademark it, and we start to put a disciplinary literacy stamp outside of a book and everything, we don't need it to become another slogan. It is an explanation of a kind of teaching that has always existed, but often at the margins. We don't need it to be the new phonemic awareness, where as soon as people understood what that was, it became the answer to everything they were looking for. It can be used for a huge range of possible positive outcomes, and it is an orientation to how we do teaching. So there is not out there a disciplinary literacy program. There is not out there a training that will teach you disciplinary literacy. Disciplinary literacy is the outcome of educators engaging in this orientation, where they understand what texts are specific to their content area and the communities their content area reflects, where they understand deeply enough to model it, how to engage with those texts strategically, and where students are invited to do the work of the discipline, not just read about it, but participate in it. That's disciplinary literacy. So the big important questions that we're asking as educators that are trying to do this kind of instruction, or as people who are like, gee, is it happening? Or like, will these materials lend themselves? Or is this an example of it? We can ask these three questions, and where the answers to these questions are unclear, it might be teaching, but it's not disciplinary literacy. And therefore, we can't expect the kinds of outcomes that we associate with DL if we don't have clear answers to these questions. The first one might seem weird, but like, here's the thing. People are getting excited about this again. So on the internet, you'll see things like Scarborough's rope in 5 different colors, one for science, one for social studies, because we've got a different kind of reading for we do not have a different kind of reading for every content area. We have vocabulary that overlaps. We have text types and purposes for reading that overlap. And what we find when we study disciplinary or expert or specialized ways of using text to do things in the world is that the differences within a discipline are actually bigger than the differences across them. That like if we study the literate practices of one of the engineering labs in our engineering building, there are different practices, different habits of mind, different ways of knowing, different vocabulary, different syntax, different text structures, different assumed background knowledge in the lab down the hall. And those differences can be just as big as the differences in the building where math is happening somewhere else. The other reason I like to use engineering as an example is that engineering is not a pure thing. It's a little bit of computer science. It's a little bit of physics. It's a little bit of math. It's a bit of communication. And when we get down to it, nothing worth doing isn't already interdisciplinary. So we don't need to learn to read like a scientist because scientists read differently than each other depending on the purpose for their reading, the format of the text, and who they're reading with and for. And so what we need is awareness and flexibility. Meta-discursive awareness is how we talk about it. It's like meta-linguistic awareness, but understanding of how language is working in this setting, and flexibility to engage with different text types all throughout your day in high school, all throughout your experience across the weekend and all the different communities that you might want to participate in. And all throughout the different disciplinary communities that you find yourself aligning with. If you do think of yourself as a math person or someone who likes science, figuring out what are the text types, what are the strategies, what are the ways of using language and communicating, what are the habits of mind and the big questions and the things that stand out when I'm thinking in these ways. So we don't want to dumb this down to the point where kids are being quizzed on how a scientist reads, because that was maybe how one scientist read this one time. But we actually have a lot of evidence about the nuance being tied much more closely to purpose, audience, and format than to the name of the class. So we know what's disciplinary literacy instruction if it's probably already multidisciplinary, which means it's multimodal, multi-text. Nobody reads one text by itself, except in school. If you think about your email and what else is open on your computer when you're engaging with an email, you might have looked something up, you might have pulled a resource, you might have an attachment, you might be texting somebody in the bottom, you might be shopping. Like we always are using more than one text to do things. And those texts create internal scaffolds for us that support us in our understanding of purpose, our understanding of audience, our understanding of vocabulary even. We kind of create miniature text sets for ourselves as adults with text in the world. And so that is a hallmark of disciplinary literacy instruction. It is multimodal, multitextual. It invites us to recognize that kids bring a range of literacy proficiencies. They may or may not match up with the text demands of the text we are giving them, but they are proficient users of, proficient doers of different kinds of literacies that may be close or may have implications or may actually be wrapped right up in the way that we are asking kids to read and write in class. And then again, when we think about what we do as people who do have specialized literacies for the specialized work that we do for the disciplines and the fields and the jobs that we engage with, we read what we want to know, what we want to be, what we want to do. We do not read for no reason ever again in life. And so teaching reading for adolescents is about engaging what kids want to know and who they want to be and what they want to do. What we end up with is as an equation for disciplinary literacy is if we provide access to the ways of thinking and reasoning about print, kids can participate more fully, which is in itself confidence building, engagement building, and then they spend the time practicing and getting exposure and giving them that awareness so that they can walk into their next class and feel out, how do I marshal all of my cultural, linguistic, and literacy resources to participate with the text that I find here and in my next period and in my next period and after school and on the weekend and when I go on to career and workplace. This is a ridiculous picture, but it's a cut and paste from an article that studied eye tracking of how people make sense of data displays if they are non-science undergraduates, science undergraduates, graduate students in science, and faculty. And what you see here, if you look closely, which you don't have to do at the moment, I'll just describe it to you. What you see here is when we ask people, what do you think you need to do to interpret a graph? Most of them know. And most of them say about the same thing. Students say about the same thing. Faculty had a little bit more of a refined version because they're reading for a different reason. They're not reading to answer questions anymore as faculty. They're reading to use that text for their next activity, not to be quizzed on it. And so their process is a little bit different when we ask them what they're going to do. Then when we use eye tracking to see what they actually do, the graduate students and faculty are pretty close to their proposed pathways. And as you can imagine, undergraduate science majors and undergraduate non-science majors are a little bit more chaotic, a little bit less efficient, and they're considering and using parts of the data display that they don't need to consider, that waste their time, that raises up information that isn't actually useful for the task. And so you can see that theirs are just more disorganized. And that, I mean, is a metaphor for sort of how the brain fires when we're doing reading at all. When we don't have a lot of reading practice and we haven't yet organized for reading, lots of parts of the brain might be firing that don't need to, and it sort of creates inefficient pathways. And when students do organize for reading, that efficiency of movement, and the efficiency of the communication across pathways is solidified, and it allows them to use it to do something else. So really, when we're teaching disciplinary literacy, I think about this kind of remote idea. We are thinking about in any given text, whether the text is a conductor in front of a band, the field in front of a football player, the science textbook in front of a bench scientist, whatever it is, we need to know where to begin. We need to know what we don't recognize, what to decode. We have to know what to prioritize. And this is where the habits of mind, the purpose for reading, the audience for writing makes a big difference. And then we have to know how to keep going. And when teachers organize the strategy and the structures that they display for children and invite children into these sort of 4 categories, they can animate their process so that they can really participate and engage. So if I think about if disciplinary literacy is part of what has been happening on the margins, I think sometimes you see the best literacy instruction. When I observe in high schools, especially if I'm not seeing great stuff, I often go to the arts wing, because there will be a art teacher or a music teacher or a band teacher that is doing these things, that is inviting participation because they understand their text well enough to teach kids to participate in the work of their discipline. If I can't find that, I sometimes can find it in like a CTE sort of a place. I sometimes can find it in electives, even within the academic core areas, like in a journalism class rather than necessarily in English literature. And in some cases, I do find it in the academic core. But this is probably the exception rather than the norm, because there are a lot of structures that work against it at the moment. And when I think about the structures that are in place for K-3 that would work against it in 412, here are 3 things that I think about, and then I'm going to show you some of these resources. If we need instruction to be really focused on engaging and empowering, and we need to have a lot of varied opportunities for kids to engage with text, to do their own reading and writing, not only being read to, not only writing fill in the blanks, not only writing to a prompt, but sometimes using their writing to do something. The curriculum options that we have nationally, not necessarily just in Connecticut, are missing too much that matters. In particular, writing time, in particular, feedback on writing, and engagement in the process of writing. So you'll see in a moment when I show you the site that I've been building there at the bottom. If we go through and count the minutes that are allocated to writing, even in programs that have a writing block, if we go through and look at what activities actually populate that writing block, the opportunities to integrate skills are really, really small. And the alignment between writing instruction as we know it in IES practice guides and evidence-based principles and any sort of meta-analysis of what writing needs to be, what we know about writing instruction is very rarely reflected in package programs that include writing. And even if you have writing on the schedule every day, what I've been finding is students are actually engaged in writing, not hearing about writing, not critiquing other writing, not looking at examples of writing, all of which are interesting and important. But about 20% of the allocated time for writing, which is small to begin with, is students doing any writing, about 20%. When they write, I am not finding examples in K3 land of them writing for a purpose, to an audience that's real, to do anything. So this is going to represent a shift from their K4, K3 experience. And also it may represent a shift away from what materials guide people to do if we end up with kind of extensions of the K3 curriculum world. Part of what I'm thinking about here with writing is that writing is the ultimate integration opportunity, but even reading. Are we working on reading to make sense of something, or are we working on reading for the sake of fluency, for the sake of accuracy, for the sake of an isolated instead of integrated opportunity? If I was thinking about how would we select curriculum that would be better suited for the kind of development and for the stage of development for the growth of adolescent readers, there are challenges here because most of the tools for writing curriculum are not focused on these things. You would really need to create criteria that's grounded in what students have been telling us about their own learning, which is that they are really responding to the processes even more than the content. And when the process is opaque, when the process is boring, when they don't have access to those processes, the content doesn't matter. When they do, the content is all of a sudden fantastic. You can find kids that are super stoked about reading classics if the process for their reading of that classic is clear to them, accessible to them, and grounded in some sort of purpose that matters to them. You can also find kids that tell you that the classics are what's wrong with school. And we know that's not the content, it is the process we invite them into. And then similarly, the tools that we have for screening are largely just tools that have been validated for K2 or K3 that are extrapolated and extended for older kids. And they answer important questions for us in the beginning stages of reading. They get less and less aligned to progressions towards the learning goals that align with middle and high school standards, align with middle and high school rigor. And so we end up with data that is peripheral to the real assessment questions that we come to with students. So we can think about K-12 as an opportunity to reflect the kind of learners that are developing. We probably should not be thinking about it. I'm going to rephrase that. We should not be thinking about it as an extension of K3. And when you see that in package programs or in fact sheets about adolescent literacy, when you see that of just whatever we said for K3, them too, maybe a little bit of content area, you should be suspicious of it. What I've put together for you here, this is not a hyperlink, so I'll just come out to it in a second here. Readingpolicy.org is brand new. And so if you are brand new like yesterday, so if you are accessing the internet from a school, it may still be blocked because the school that I was in this morning blocks new IP addresses or blocks new whatever, I don't understand. But it should resolve itself by tomorrow, or look from your internet outside of one of the places that has a lot of restrictions. What I've done here is just sort of put the approved programs and approved assessments for all the different states in the country. Part of what I do is national comparisons of state reading policy and international comparisons of reading policy. So this is just for the US. If you can imagine, you can click on any of these programs and then you get sort of information about them. And what you will want to look at when you're thinking about what do we have for for 412, you'll want to look at information about what's the quality indicators that they have, the topic coverage that they have. Let me click on a different one so you can see just other things. And then also the grades that they represent. And you can compare programs and charts here and kind of sort that if you want to. You'll be able to kind of see some information about those things. And I've explained them or attempted to explain them in the quality rating tools and things like that with a glossary and with these sort of frequently asked questions. I want to make it really clear because I understand who I'm talking to today. This is not about Connecticut. This is about the trends nationally. And I have made an attempt to capture what's happening nationally with 412 policy, and it is nothing. In fact, model policy that's put out by Excel and Ed, which is one of the think tanks that's put out a lot of the model policy that's driven reading related policies in the last 15 years, is exactly their K-3 policy plus content area. It's the same language, and it's not compelling. It's not compelling to middle and high school parents. It's not compelling to middle and high school educators. So it hasn't had the same momentum behind it, which means you have an opportunity here to do something that is not just kind of carpet bagged from state to state. You have an opportunity to really match what kids in Connecticut have been saying out loud about what their instruction looks and feels like and the kind of instruction that they want and need. And I'll stop talking here and do the questions now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gabriel. You certainly touched upon a lot of points that I'm sure resonate with many of us who have been in schools and may continue to be in schools. Something's happening here. So I think we'll just open the floor to anybody that has any specific questions for Dr. Gabriel. You can raise your hand. Ms. Brown, do you have a question? I see that your button is still on, so I wasn't sure.
I do have a question, but I didn't know if I was prepared to articulate the question I have, but this hand is from earlier, but I will take it down till I'm ready to formulate my question.
Okay, we'll get back to you then. Ms. Healy?
Hi,
Yeah.
thank you so much,
Hi.
Gabriel, for the presentation. It was really informative, especially, I will say, for me towards the end, with all the with the resources and stuff. You know, one of the things that our mission, right, is to counsel the implementation of the law. And I would argue that now that we've gotten through the first section of it, it's to ensure accountability, that what we've put in place is working. You mentioned screenings. So, like if we say move into, or when we move into 4 to 12, you're saying the screenings, what did you say? That they're miscalibrated for 412. So obviously we won't have screenings to use. And I guess one of the things that I struggle with is I don't know if you can answer this, but wouldn't it be prudent to wait until we have data to show that what we've put in place already is working, right? We haven't seen any screening data from the new assessments. I think since our last meeting, or maybe the last meeting, we learned that the assessments or screenings have been moved to a different area under the State Department. Hopefully we should be getting updates forthcoming at some point soon. Obviously with now this new school year being full implementation required. So I don't know if that was really a question, but
Yeah,
I guess,
I hear you.
how do you see moving forward,
Yep.
and especially because you're saying like this is new,
Yeah,
right?
no,
We're moving into something. Okay, I'm going to stop talking.
I get this question. I get this question a lot. I think it's actually two questions. So, and correct me if I take it in a direction that you didn't mean. I'll bring it back home. One question is, do you move forward with a strategy before you have evidence of its effectiveness? And the other question is, how do we do screening in a responsible way for middle and high school, given the kinds of screens that are available? And I think for the first question, students this is the double edge here is that we do need change, improvement, support, attention, resources for adolescent literacy yesterday, not in 5 years. And we know that it will not be like K3. So regardless of how the K3 strategy has gone, we are not, it wouldn't make any sense to replicate it. If it worked well for K3, it's because it worked well for K3. We have different learners, we have different learning goals, we have different infrastructure for learning. And when we take a look at people who have done efficacy studies and impact studies of reading policies in K2, K3 across different states, they're coming out with these answers that are all about infrastructure, that are all about implementation, that are all about teacher buy-in, that are all about these things that are not necessarily about like what brand of X did you use, but are you choosing a set of strategies that can lay on top of the infrastructure for learning that you find there. The infrastructure in middle and high school is different. The strategy will have to be different. So you can absolutely move in this space without knowing. And the flip side of that is, of course, we have to be accountable for the impact of these policies. Of course we do. One of the things that I've been trying to figure out a way to do, abstractly, in the absence of a lot of impact data, which in some cases I think must just be being suppressed because we don't have a lot of impact studies yet, even though we have a lot of states running down this pathway. The studies we do have on screeners are showing that we're not identifying more kids with difficulty reading, but when we put more screeners in place, we tend to identify more white and upper middle class kids. So we're changing the bias of who gets identified, but not changing the volume. And I don't think that was anybody's goal. It's an unintended consequence, but it is a recorded consequence in states that have and do not have screening laws. We don't have that information for Connecticut specifically, or at least not to my knowledge. But even though we don't, we can take that principle and say, well, screeners are not definitely good. They are maybe neutral and possibly a distraction, which is really what sort of the data-wise people at Harvard's Policy Institute have been talking a lot about, is like less is more on the data front. I think when we're talking about K3 and we're screening for reading difficulties that like can snowball and emerge, we want to err on the side of screen carefully. And when we're talking about later, the questions we're kind of gathering data that can't actually inform a change in a kid's schedule, in their instruction, in anything else. And so we just gather the data, we submit them to testing without being able to use that data in a really helpful way. One of the things that I have on this, I'll just show you really briefly. When we're looking at an assessment, we look at some random one, is I've tried to put what it is calibrated for. Because I always tell my students there's no bad assessment, there's just bad uses of assessments. And, so I have kind of like, does it have good classification accuracy? Who's making it? Because that also tells us what else are you getting sold at the same time that you're buying this one. Things tend to get bundled. And then when we do these comparisons and stuff, we can look across and see what things are validated to. So STAR is validated to a bunch of subtests from tests that are used for intervention and special education. MAP is calibrated to ACT. So if our question is, how is this student likely to score on the ACT, MAP is a good test to answer that question. But it's not a good test to answer, how should I teach them tomorrow? If the test is calibrated to state testing, PARCC or Smarter Balance, then it might be, what band is this kid going to show up in? But it doesn't kind of direct instruction the way that some of the screeners that are much more detailed can direct our instruction when we're talking about K3, where we're still talking about item knowledge and we're still talking about skills that we develop in isolation and then integrate, like the nature of reading and writing once we've hit integration. We just ask different questions about it. Also in high school, we're not having data team meetings about the STAR score in order to change the science curriculum. Like, what does your score change? If anything, it changes your access to electives and your placement in an intervention, if there even is an intervention in your high school. So what we can use the data for is really different too. And so what I encourage you to think about with these screeners, they're fine. They all do what they say they do, but we tend to think that they are doing all the things. instead of answering the question they were designed to answer. Schools sometimes want that answer about ACT, SAT, and that is useful, but that's not instructionally useful. That is policy-wise useful. That is grouping and sorting useful. They just play a different role with when reading and writing are more sophisticated.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel.
We also have research, sorry, just like wonk-wise, we also have research that shows that like we're not getting different information than, they're so well aligned that you actually could have used SBAC data to do the sorting and ranking of the kids, and you wouldn't have gotten different answers than if you used SBAC and STAR. Do you know what I mean? So then why are we doing that? Especially if teachers aren't able to sort of turn that into something that's actionable in their courses.
Principal Brown, just circling back.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for bringing this information. I'm in a pre-K to 5 school. And so something you said in the big question, it was like, what is the disciplinary community using the text to do? And so I go immediately to thinking about the teachers and how do we better equip our staff to support this disciplinary literacy implementation for students so they have that access to content. As there's still many of them in 4th and 5th are still working on unfortunately, some of their foundational skills.
Yes, absolutely.
So
And
how do they do both things well?
Yeah, I think one starts to feed the other. Like I always think about readers like oak trees, and the seed feeds the tree in the beginning. Like the foundational skills hold up a reader when they don't have a lot of reading experiences yet. But once they have had some reading experiences, I think of those as the leaves. The leaves feed the tree, and we get this sort of reciprocal thing going on in terms of the practice and the exposure and the all of the good kind of cycle. So we really appreciate the question, because we have plenty of examples of science-based curricula in K-5, of concept-oriented reading instruction in K-5 being used as an intervention for reading scores and for reading achievement, because it is more interesting, it's more specialized, and therefore it offers a way into practicing those skills and integrating those skills that is missing. I sit in a weird place as somebody who has worked primarily with middle and high school readers that have reading difficulty. I usually see them after they've had a lot of years of struggle, even in kind of official and well-known interventions. And one of the key struggles I see right around the 5th grade moment is they can do it. They can do the isolated skills. They can pass out of their intervention program, but they can't put it together for class. And that integration requires the motivational fuel of a really interesting reading task. It requires the strategy of somebody who understands how to explain how we use this text to do something worth doing, not just how we use this text to answer the question. And so for teachers, it's really all about inviting them to think about, how is this text used in the world? Who reads it? How do they read it? What else is on their desk or open on their computer when they're reading it? What are they reading it for? And how are they doing it? Where do they start? What do they pay attention to? How do they keep going? The story I always tell is about, I was at a high school department meeting of the social studies department with a reading specialist there, and the reading specialist was going about telling everybody that they couldn't read the Constitution because the Lexile level was too high for the readers. And the social studies teacher said, but I've never read it left to right, top to bottom, straight through. And no one has. Nobody that reads this text for real is reading it left to right, top to bottom, straight through for rate, for words correct per minute. We go to a piece of the Constitution that we're using to make an argument, that we're looking for specific wording, that we're doing close reading on. And the best close reading lesson I've ever seen was somebody who had been a lawyer, because who does close reading? Lawyers do. So they know how to do it and why to do it and what are the habits and what does it look like. And all of a sudden, it's not a poster on the wall that says, I got to read this sentence 5 times because that's what Fisher and Frey said. It's this, I need to find layers here. So I'm going to go over it and over it and over it and believe that my mind is going to find those layers. So I think I think it's an exciting invitation for teachers. I really like Alfred Tatum's work on this, that it's really becomes an equity tool, particularly for inviting people from communities that are not who you think of as a scientist, or not who you think of as an author, or not who you think of as whatever, inviting them into the practices, into full participation. I think about that as being neuro-inclusive too. Do you know that your mind can do this work if we talk to you about the way that your mind can do this work? Instead of letting kids come to their own conclusions about who's good at what.
Thank you so very much for that response.
Thank you. Dr. Hickey, I also see you have some things in the chat here.
Gary's hand was up first, if you don't mind. He can, I don't want to cut.
There we go. No, Superintendent Highsmith.
Oh, thanks. And thanks for the presentation as well. I also appreciate it. So a lot of the stuff that I've been reading lately, like Heather Hill and others in terms of research, seems to suggest that there's a larger effect size if you focus on high quality instruction as opposed to content knowledge. And I'm wondering to what degree the disciplinary learning focuses on content knowledge as opposed to high quality instruction.
When we do disciplinary literacy for teachers or for students?
For teachers.
Yeah, when we do disciplinary literacy professional development work, we're not talking about content at all. We're asking teachers to hold content steady and think about the practices they use to engage that content. So when I say that we need to bring the focus for adolescent, we just had a panel of high school kids come and tell us what works and doesn't work for them as readers and writers. And they said the same thing, and their message was loud and clear about we need to know why this is important, and we need to know how we want to do it. You can put anything in front of me, I will do it, but I will do the bare minimum. If I understand the process, I'm going to come with you on this. And so sometimes, as a literacy person coming into all these different content areas in order to do disciplinary literacy work, it makes me nervous because I don't know anything about math and I'm talking to a bunch of math teachers. But what I do know is how to invite kids in to be full participants in whatever the activity is. And that's why I say that I see it in these specialized areas at the margins so often. I see it in choir. I see it in when you have a really good coach. I see it at practice. I see these invitations to participate in the work of that community. And so I don't have to know math in order to have that conversation. And, we do have a principle about having professional development be content aligned. That's not so much about this, like I am now talking about trigonometry. It is more focused on that we're helping teachers engage the content they have. So at the risk of saying it's not content free, but what we bring in a disciplinary literacy conversation is not about the content, it's about access points. And so folks that have been thinking a lot about literacy development or have been thinking, sometimes they find their way in because it resonates with universal design. Sometimes they find their way in because it resonates with equity pedagogies, because it's inviting all different kinds of people to participate in the thing. It will resonate with some of these things because they're all pointing toward that same end goal of, access to high rigor, high outcome, ambitious teaching. I don't know if that answers the question there. I'm sorry, I kind of got on a roll.
The only other thing I'll say is my hope is that as we start to focus more on 412, that we go at a pace that is reasonable enough for us to decide to what degree we're going to focus on content and to what degree we're going to focus on high quality instruction. My concern is that I keep hearing about this need to integrate literacy into all subject areas, which people have tried for a very long time. But my concern is, how exactly do we do that and get the largest effect size?
Oh, yeah. No, I have a good answer about that. I mean, I came into the profession during a time when we had to hold hands and chant every teacher is a teacher of reading. And there's sort of trauma marks left over from that. We've got social studies and science teachers that do not want to hear it anymore because it basically meant at one point, stop doing what you're prepared to do, what you care about, and start doing this reading thing instead. We are not going to integrate reading into content areas. It is already there. We have to have an expansive definition of what a text is. We have to understand how the strategies and skills that we use to decode, to recognize quickly and smoothly, to make meaning, to connect that meaning to other things, how those skills exist across all different text types and purposes for reading, and they transfer. You might have become a reader in music class without knowing it and transferred it. You might have done it in reading class and transferred to music, but only if we have people that are aware of how to unearth and invite kids to participate in those things in what they're in the areas they actually know about, in the areas they're actually trained to teach, which does raise questions for 4th and 5th grade teachers that are prepared as generalists. I think that's an important question. Their challenge is to understand the specialization. Our challenge when we think about middle and high school is to ask people not to add reading and writing where it does not belong, and to see where it already was. That's how we ensure that it's powerful.
Thank you once again, Dr. Gabriel. Dr. Hickey.
Thank you so much. So, so much of what you said, Dr. Gabriel, resonates with me, not only in my current position, but also as I was a 2nd grade teacher and a middle school teacher. And you know what the points you were making about engaged learners, you know, that you see when you're in the classroom. You do see that about the engagement and their passions across the grades and what they can access text-wise. I just also wanted to clarify that because we as a council are working on the expansion of the strategy does not mean that the legislation is expanding in any way. I have not heard of any legislators coming forward with that. The reason that we're doing this as a council is exactly what Superintendent Highsmith was saying, how, you know, teachers are asking, how do we do this? What strategy should we be using? What can we be using? So we thought one of the first steps could be using the strategy that the council created for K3 and expanding that. And those are some of the conversations that you haven't been a part of, obviously, but the council has been. So I so appreciate you coming here because you gave us a lot to really think about and what kind of direction do we want to move forward with this strategy. I did put in the chat for all of you the updated revised menu of assessments for here in Connecticut as they were reflected on Dr. Gabriel's map. There's 2 links that actually say the same thing, but one is directly on our website under literacy. And the second is the board documents that were brought forward because there was a lot of research that went into that. If you do look at that board meeting, you'll see our own Dr. Coyne from the council speaking about that work too, which is so fascinating. I was writing frantically notes. I'm trying to see if there was anything else here. You can come back to me, but those were just, oh, I know, there was one more thing. You know, when you said Fisher, it triggered in me the self-efficacy piece of Doug Fisher's work. How does that work into this? I mean, I see it right hand in hand about teaching kids about self-efficacy and literacy and how well they do with reading as a result.
Yep, I think it works, you know, in that cycle, both as a catalyst and an outcome. The confidence is built by having positive experiences. The positive experiences lead to more positive experiences. When students are invited into processes instead of invited into content, they display greater self-efficacy because they know where to start. Going back to that remote control, they know where to start, they know what to look for, they know how to move forward, and they can persist in the face of difficulty. When they understand process, when their instruction has been process focused, self-efficacy is greater. So, and then it, you know, spirals.
Right. Which is your do, right? The do piece, right? We're doing it with them kind of thing. Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. Thank you. I did see another hand.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Lucero.
So thank you for your presentation. I just sat here wondering the whole time about pre-service programs? And do you know of any of this work that's being done either at UConn or someplace else that is preparing our teachers better to have this sort of mindset as they're becoming educators?
We're in kind of a good spot for this because I think besides my work with colleagues on this in Connecticut, the other kind of really active team, one of the other really active teams is in Massachusetts. So we end up with a relatively good pool of pre-service teacher educators with pre-service teachers that are exposed to these ideas. One of the challenges, of course, in all of pre-service teacher education is there's a difference between knowing and knowing how to do in context. So we practice it, we talk about it, and they're also learning everything else about teaching at the same time. And most of the evidence that we have from the first 2 years of teaching is that teachers take on the characteristics and the practices and the habits of the teachers that surround them. And so it's one of those things that we are working on from the bottom. If we think about like people entering the profession, like we're working on it from that angle. And then my colleagues in Boston have been spending a lot of time thinking about professional development and also working on that from the other angle. And hopefully they will meet in the middle, because I don't think this is something that we can't count on our newest teachers to make a paradigm shift happen in a profession that they're just entering. But we can make sure they're familiar with the idea so that when the conditions are right, when the leadership and the infrastructure allows it, they can fully participate. The other sort of good thing in that setting is that the long-term research on disciplinary literacy that's come out of places like WestEd on models like reading apprenticeship or disciplinary learning, some of the stuff that is subject specific, like the Reading Like a Historian project and Seeds of Literacy, Seeds of Science, Roots of Reading, I don't remember, Seeds or something. Those are all professional development focused. And so we have quite a bit of evidence-based ways to engage faculty in making these shifts. And it becomes a question of infrastructure, by which I mean, is leadership aligned with materials, aligned with assessment and messages about what's important?
I'll just note one more thing. I come from Ohio, and so in order to renew my certification, I must take a certain amount of courses every year, and I've had my certifications for a really long time. And I am surprised here that I just have to write a check. And so I do think that there is something to continuing this work, because what you're describing to me is lifelong learners. And if we're going to be lifelong learners, then there should be expectations for our certifications. And I do think that that needs to be revisited, because I don't know that that has always been the case in Connecticut, but I do appreciate the fact that I feel like I have to continue to work as an educator to remain an educator in the state of Ohio. That's just a food for thought. I'm
contributing to continuing credit bearing courses on disciplinary literacy in 3 states right now. So I think folks are walking where you're leading on that, but it has not been part of our tradition here in Connecticut. We write checks.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. I am going to just refer here to Dr. Oldham, because I know you just put something in the chat. Do you want to briefly describe it before we say goodbye to Dr. Gabriel?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gabriel. I really appreciated your presentation, and we've been working hard over at the University of St. Joseph to really prepare all of our teacher candidates to be ready to implement comprehension strategies, general ones, as well as being informed by this orientation to support all students. And one that we've been using is out of the Cedar Center. There's a really nice tool there to evaluate syllabi, and there's course enhancement modules. And so I do think, to your point, to your question, Professor Lucera, that we are doing the work in Ed Prep as well in collaboration with all of you leading our amazing school communities. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oldham. A big thank you to Dr. Gabriel today. I know we have a lot to consider. We obviously are not going to be moving to the application discussion today, but we'll reserve that for our next meeting. And thank you to Kim Healy for putting forward the guest speaker form. I think this has been very helpful and will certainly spark a lot of conversation for us on our next meeting, June 17th. So thank you, Dr. Gabriel. And before we do close officially, any other comments? We have about a minute and a half.
Thanks again for having me, folks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Gabriel, for coming. Enjoyed both of our conversations. So thanks again. Just a little nuts and bolts kind of thing. It looked like the invitation that worked best was the original one that comes to you with like the button on there to join the meeting. So let's remember that for the next time. If there are problems, do reach out to Kati and I was looking at emails, her first, please. And we will do our best to get you in. So thank you for your patience as we were experiencing some difficulties there.
Thank you all, and meeting is officially adjourned. Wishing you a delightful, smooth week ahead.
Bye.
Bye-bye.